I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee.
Dr. Bofi.
Present.
Dr. Bofi is present. Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Davis is present. Ms. Edmonston. Ms. Edmonston is present. Mr. Garvey.
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Ms. Holloway. Present. Ms. Holloway is present. Dr. Jones. Ms. Lewis. Present. Ms. Lewis is present. Ms. Orange Jones.
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Rock.
Present.
Mr. Rock is present. Dr. Thomason.
Present.
Dr. Thomason is present. Ms. Vautier. Here. Ms. Vautier is present. Mr. Bowman
Present.
is present. You do have a quorum.
What's our next item?
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3.
Is there a motion
So
to
moved.
approve? Thank you, Mr. Davis. I need a second.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Thomason. Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Your first item on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of requests from local education agencies for waivers of policy contained in bulletins for the 2017-2018 school year submitted by the State Superintendent of Education. The department recommendation is to approve the request submitted by the LEAs for waiver of policy contained in bulletins regarding class size and ratios.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway. Second, Ms. Fauche. Superintendent? Nope. Do we have any comment cards?
Not on this item.
Board members, do you have any questions? Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 3, item 3.1, consideration of the reauthorization of successful course choice providers and a status report regarding course choice providers. The department recommendation is to approve the reauthorization and to receive the status report.
Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Rock. And I need a second. I thought I saw a hand here. Thank you, Ms. Holloway. Do we have comment cards? Oh, I'm sorry. That was actually Ms. Edmonston, wasn't it? Do we have any comment cards on this item? No. Superintendent? Yes, Dr. Jones.
I'll wait till after
He doesn't need to speak.
Oh, the only.
I did not mean that in an ugly way.
That didn't sound nice.
You sound
I'm
like
sorry.
the way my wife does me. When
The
That's legitimate.
he doesn't have
The
anything to
superintendent does not wish to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the way she framed it too. So, my husband does not wish to speak. All right, it's a very simple question. If I can find it again, what is the definition of a successful course choice provider?
At the start of their term, and this group started in 2013, there are academic goals set for each based on the type of course that they offer. For example, I noted one of them today represented as ACT Mastery Press. They set goals based on participation, based on academic gains, and as with the charter school, they are reauthorized or not reauthorized based on their completion of those goals according to a rubric that was approved in the original approval of the plan.
So if a good program fails short of a goal, they would automatically not get re?
No, there's a scoring system. So they're scored on multiple measures, and they're scored as to how significantly they demonstrated the gains or not. But the system's really in place to show that if, say, for example, a course provider, all of the kids fail the course, I mean, in that case, you wouldn't want to reapprove.
Okay. Well, you answered my question. The basic concern I had was there some standard way that you're determine success? And that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Board members, some handouts were paper clipped together for you. They were just paper clipped together just to keep them for each board member. They are different items, so if you unpaper clip them, the first one right now is the next item on page 16, item 5.1. I'm sorry, your handout's not for this one. Consideration of an update regarding the Every Student Succeeds ESSA plan for Louisiana and proposed bulletin revisions. The department recommendation is to receive the report and proposed revisions to bulletins 111 and 118 regarding accountability and assessments.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We have a second by Mr. Garvey. Do we have any comment cards?
Yes.
Superintendent, do you wish to speak? We have Eva Kemp, who supports the recommendation but does not wish to speak. And we have Deborah Shum that would like to provide some information.
Good morning.
Morning.
Debbie Shum, representing Louisiana Association of Principals, and I actually sent a letter to all of the BESE board members and Superintendent White with the concern that I have on one of the particular pieces of the 6 pages of revisions that are going into Bulletin 111. And let me preface this by saying that I do not believe that there is any principal or any teacher in any building anywhere that does not want every single one of their students to achieve mastery and to do the very best that they can. However, I find that there is an issue with the new label that was actually introduced during the last 5 minutes of the March 29th BESE meeting that was not vetted amongst all of the stakeholders, talking about putting a label on school report cards called urgent intervention needed. And here are my concerns. To me, that information is needed, but I think it is better suited being placed on the principal's report card so that they can use that data for the subgroup if they do not have a C or better, so that they can use that to see what they need to do to address those strategies. We now have a new series of report cards basically that's going to come out because we are now adding the growth factor. We will have an SPS performance score, and we will also have these labels either urgent intervention needed or urgent intervention required. I do believe that the urgent intervention required, which means that a subgroup had an F or below, had an F grade for 2 or more years in continuance, should go on the school report card. I am very concerned that there will be much confusion about the urgent intervention needed. Urgent intervention needed label will be placed on a school report card if a particular subgroup does not score at a C or better level on that particular year. It's on a 1-year basis, not on a 2-year basis. So therefore, if you had 6 to 10 subgroups in your school, you could have year 1, subgroup A, that had an intervention needed. You fix that, and next year you come back and it's a different subgroup. If you're addressing the issue, putting that label in addition to all of the new things that are going to be placed on report cards, to me is going to send a very confusing letter or confusing report card to both community members, parents, and students, because it will only be to specifically address a subgroup within the school. If a school continues and does not meet that subgroup's needs, then they're going to get the urgent intervention required label placed on their report card. So my request is to make it a simpler process by making sure in this bulletin that we put the urgent intervention needed label on the principal's report card so that the data is there, but that there's not all this confusion and concern. Because what could happen is I could have a student with either an ELL language problem and maybe they scored a D on their math test, or a student who has a specific disability in math who made a D for on their test, and because of that school will get labeled, even though that may have been the absolute best that that student was able to do in that particular arena. I would suggest that a student who had a specific disability in math and scored a D would be equivalent to a student who didn't have a disability scoring a C. I do not think that that particular piece of information is something that's going to be beneficial for anyone to see on the school report card. It's going to confuse the issue, and I'm simply asking if According to the data that the department released, 1,000 out of 1,400 schools will receive that label for what purpose? And I'm asking that that data be reported in a different format, because you're going to catch the people who are not performing and bringing those data results up in the urgent intervention required label. Thank you.
Do we have any other comment cards? No. Board members? Yes, Ms. Holloway. Yes, Ms. Holloway, go for it.
I can ask the superintendent, okay.
Yes.
John, in regards to her comments, my question is, and I'm aware, Deborah, are you still on the Accountability Commission? Has this been brought forward at the committee level in regards to her concerns?
No.
And if so?
No, the committee issued its guidance to BESE. BESE took the guidance, BESE directed us to make a number of adjustments. One of those adjustments was to, on the subgroup label, rather than calling it a target intervention, to call it, for the subgroup, urgent intervention, rather than targeted intervention. And that's what we've done. The purpose of the Accountability Commission is to advise the board. The board took the advice. The board agreed with, I think, 99% of it. Some of it suggested changes to. However, what's posted right now is just another set of rules posted for public comment. Anyone over the course of the next month to 2 months who wants to comment may well comment, and Ms. Shum has issued her comment. So there's no vote being taken today on this stuff. We understand the feedback. It's up there, and I think you and we should consider it.
And just for more context, this was an ad in response to concerns that we heard from stakeholders about prioritizing children who have not had equitable access to high quality services in the past. So I think it's important for us to go back to what led to the motion to add that information. Yes.
I think today, if I'm understanding this correctly, these are proposed revisions to bulletins that we're just receiving today, as the superintendent has said, not voting on.
That's correct.
I think there are many issues or many sections within this bulletin and many proposed changes that warrant additional discussion. When we as a body made that amendment at the end of that March meeting, supposedly in response to some different groups that wish to see some things in the plan, I thought part of that was supposed to be going back to stakeholders for additional discussion. Because in many of the stakeholder meetings around the state in the course of the year, what people understood what was going to be included, we did change toward the end, supposedly in response to what some stakeholders wanted, but then it wasn't brought back again to the majority of people to take a look at again and to say, well, okay, this may be a good one, this may not be. So hopefully within this next few weeks, this next period of time while this is going out, we're going to be getting some of that feedback. That's what I'm hearing from some people, that they wish, I know I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but we have the leadership of the Superintendent's Association here and all that really want to have some additional discussion on some of these areas. So I think it's good that we received the report today, that discussion continues before we take the final vote on changes within the bulletin, and that we completely vet it with the participating groups.
Board members, do you have any other questions or items you'd like to discuss? Yes, Ms. Lewis.
Just an additional comment. I would like to make sure that this detailed bulletin also will be addressed in subsequent advisory councils and getting feedback on that as well before it comes back to BESE, and just so that we're abreast on what some of their comments and recommendations are as well.
Madam Chair, will you repeat what she said? We couldn't hear it on here.
Ms. Lewis, would you like to repeat it?
Just wanted to make sure as well, not just various stakeholders, but as well that this is also presented to the advisory councils in this detailed format for their feedback to BESE as well before the meeting.
Did you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments? Ms. Holloway?
No, I don't. I just wanted to thank Deborah for forwarding that information to us. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 103, item 5.2, consideration of revisions to bulletins regarding early childhood policy in response to the legislation of the 2017 regular legislative session. The department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent revisions to bulletins 137 and 139 regarding licensure and finance, as well as an emergency rule for sections of Bulletin 139 regarding school staff readiness tax credit in response to Senate Resolution 209. Updated documentation has been distributed.
Is there a motion? We need a motion to move forward, members.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I have a second by Mr. Rock. Superintendent White?
Thank you. Members, this is a complicated piece of policy, and so I'm going to share a couple of details about it. Before I do that, I do want to bring your attention, because Representative Smith is here. Toward the end of the legislative session, the administration, working with the legislature, identified $5 million in additional funding that could be saved through reductions in one area, and there was a decision about where to prioritize it, and Representative Smith, working, I think probably I can say most closely with Senator Morrell, stepped up and working with Secretary Robinson, made sure that all $5 million went to early childhood education. It was not a well-reported issue. It was a very difficult policy issue to work through, but I wanted to publicly thank her for making that contribution, because that's really hundreds of youngsters who will now be served who would not have been served in inadequate child care. So thank you to you, Representative. Next, with respect to this policy related to early childhood, one of the most contentious issues, of course, and one of our most important roles, if not our most important role, is to safeguard child safety. That is the role of licensure first and foremost. And one of the most contentious issues, of course, has been background checks for individuals who work with young children. That has been worked on the federal level, in fact, where conditions of us receiving federal money are that we abide by very stringent and occasionally cumbersome background check requirements. The legislature undertook aligning our state laws regarding background checks with federal laws to make sure that no predator ever gets within sight of the children of this state. And I will tell you that the federal requirements are cumbersome. They are not easy for small businesses to abide by, and I have great sympathy for small business owners. However, safety has come first in both the laws of the federal government and now the laws of the state, and we are asking that you just take the changes the legislature made to protect child safety and move them into the bulletins, which are a set of very prescriptive requirements for how we, working with law enforcement, are to conduct background checks, how they are to be funded and paid for by centers and by individuals involved. You've also been receiving some correspondence about an element that's not about background checks, but that's also about safety, which is the ability for the state, when there is concern about a licensing violation, a safety issue, to demand videotape recordings of the incident, any evidence that may be possible of what actually happened to the child. That already exists in the state's regulations. However, it's not specific that when your regulations say that the state may access records, that those records include video records. And we have had some lack of clarity with providers where there's been a concern about a child, maybe a child wandering off, a child on a bus, what have you, about whether or not the state has the right to access video records in order to verify what actually happened. We're asking today that you give us clarity that records includes video records, so that when safety is a concern, we can demand those records and receive them and review them as appropriate evidence of anything that has or has not occurred. So I say just generally to you, I would expect that what you're going to hear is concern from small businesses, and I have sympathy for them. There are elements within the federal laws that are not perfect. However, they're there to protect safety first and foremost. They are the federal law. It is now the state law. And I strongly urge that we bring our bulletins into line with both of those statutes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
State Representative Pat Smith, would you like to come up? We also have Melanie Bronfen, and then Cindy Bishop is on hand if we have any questions. Was there a board member that wanted to speak?
Yeah,
Yes, Mr. Garvey.
I had a question with the superintendent. You said that state law, state statute says that BESE or the Department of Education will have access to records of these early childhood providers to investigate an incident?
Your regulation, BESE's regulations have that. The licensing
There's
regulations.
no state statute that mirrors that
I'd
regulation?
have to ask an attorney. We are able to request records on demand in the broadest sense from schools and school systems. Dr. Jones and I have talked about that before. I would imagine that a similar statute, if not that statute, covers the child care issue, but I can't verify that. I'd need an attorney to do that.
I would imagine, but let me ask the question that courts have interpreted the word records to include stuff like videotapes?
Again, I'd have to ask an attorney. I do think, though, that what would be helpful is, given how much centers look at the guidelines, we would like you to clarify in the bulletin that, in fact, records, when requested, includes video records. But actually, to Mr. Garvey, I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay.
No, I don't. I'm happy to get an attorney, though, to answer the question of that. Would that be helpful?
That would be, yes,
Okay.
it would.
So, if staff, if we could have that, yeah.
Yes, Ms. Voce.
Just following up on that, are you asking us to approve then requesting the videotapes to investigate an incident that has been reported or a complaint that has been
Yes.
reported?
Yes.
Or are you doing it as a compliance measure that anytime you walk in and I need to see
No.
these records or these records, give me a copy of your videotape so we can review it?
No,
What are you asking
The former.
specifically?
The former. So we've had instances where there was a question as to what occurred and who is at fault, where, for example, a child may have been left alone on a street or something like that. Because cameras are required, there's video evidence of many of these incidences, but the bulletins are not clear as to whether or not the records, when we ask for them, include electronic or video records. So we are asking you to clarify.
So it's
that.
just when you're going to investigate a complaint?
Yes, correct.
Dr. Boffey.
I'm sorry, Representative. Yes.
I'm
Miss-
sorry. I just
and
have
Miss
a
Sin.
question. Are video cameras required in every child care center?
They're not a requirement in every center, no.
So who are they required for and who are they not? Just it's up to you if you want to put a video camera in? If you're a child care center?
I would need to ask. I guess I'm getting head nods, so I guess that is the case, that they're, yeah.
They can opt in or opt out?
They can have them, but they're not required to have them.
So
Okay.
this would be if the video record existed and the department requested it in response to an incident
We'd like
to
it to be
investigate.
required. We'd like to be required that the video has to be provided upon request.
But we're not putting in place policies that would require them to go out and purchase video systems. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. Representative.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today regarding the resolution that was passed. I am State Representative Patricia Haynes Smith, and of course my partner in crime here is the one that brought this to me and said, we got to get this passed right away. So we basically did. But I don't want you to get confused either. The money that we did for the additional dollars for child care and the background checks were two different bills. The bill on background checks was done by Representative Seabaugh, and those rules are different from what we're talking about here today on the additional dollars, the $5 million for child care. It's a great day when you can get more money to be able to put children in quality child care centers, and that's what we've done. We've also, hopefully in your policy rules, that the teachers will be able to get a raise out of this, and that you'll be able to ensure that those child care centers will be able to accept more children as they move forward, because that's one of the problems. We've had a waiting list for a number of children to be able to get into quality child care, and this gives us an opportunity to actually reduce that waiting list for children who need to be in child care. So I'm not here to fuss at you today. I'm here to say that we're bringing you something great, and that great is money to be able to look at the most vulnerable of our children, the little ones that we need to prepare the foundation for them to be able to be kindergarten ready when they get ready to go to school. So I haven't seen the rules, but I want to see them and make sure that they're all in perspective of that's what we're going to do with the money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Yes, Ms. Bronfman.
I'm Melody Bronfman with the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. I do testify today not on the criminal background checks. Thank you. Not on the criminal background checks, but on the school readiness tax credit, which is actually the bulletin 130. I can't remember.
139.
Now. Thank you. 139, the last one of the three that y'all are looking at right now. And as you've heard so many times, our biggest challenge today in early care and education for our children in Louisiana under age 4 is the severe lack of public funding, which in fact has been cut by almost 70%. That is around over $65 million a year for the Child Care Assistance Program. One of the results of this lack of funding is the great challenge of employing quality child care teachers and retaining them once they are employed in child care settings. Most of the teachers in those settings earn close to minimum wage with no benefits, and the turnover rate, no surprise, is close to 40% for our lead teachers and 50% for our assistant teachers. That is the bad news, needless to say, but happily we are here today to talk about the good news for a change. The rules that you have before you today will allow us to essentially double the school readiness tax credit for the child care teachers who have obtained their ancillary teaching certificate and have worked in child care centers for at least 2 years. Our hope is that this will finally impact the turnover rates provided and provide greater quality and continuity of care for our children in child care. This increase in the funding is the result of the work of a number of people, and I'd like to just take a moment, if I may, to thank them today. First, as the superintendent mentioned, the great champion of J.P. Morrell, who is a senator and over the tax committee in the Senate, heard hearings 1.5 years ago on all the tax credits. And he was so taken with the testimony of our child care providers and our teachers and our parents about these school readiness tax credits that he made a pledge that day to increase them. And true to his word, unlike common knowledge or supposed knowledge that, and we know differently among this group, that public officials keep their word, he has kept his word and worked like a dog for the rest 1.5 years to make this happen today. So he was on the Senate, but our champion on the House side, I wouldn't even call her a champion, I would call Representative Smith a woman warrior for early care and education. She has worked tirelessly for years for our pre-K funding, our child care funding, and for our young children. And we are so grateful to both of them for their leadership on this. I also would like to thank Representative Cameron Henry. This was truly a bipartisan effort. He provided his support, as he promised, when we needed it most. And also, I'd like to thank our governor, who prioritized this once the bill got done and the world moves to his shop on the 4th floor. He prioritized this funding as well in the face of huge needs that are battling for funds in our state. So I thank him as well. This allocation represents $5 million in funding. It is just the start to the $65 million that have been cut. But it's a wonderful step in the right direction. We are so excited. And we thank you for voting in favor. This is, as usual, my long-winded way of saying, please do vote in favor of these rules. And thank you to all of our champions everywhere on behalf of early care and education. Thank you.
Ms. Bronfman.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the $5 million? What can the $5 million be used for?
It actually is an increase for this. It's very confusing because it's
Okay,
for a tax credit.
Tax credit.
It's
Okay.
for a tax credit
A tax
for
credit.
teachers, specifically based on quality. So if a teacher earns her ancillary teaching certificate, which will be required for all child
Very
care
important. That's right.
by 2019, if she earns it, she currently gets a tax credit, but if you get that level now, it's only level 1. So that's now, I hate to say figures, I think it's $1,500 a year of a refundable tax credit. That will double, more than double, in 2018 for people who get their ancillary teaching certificate and have served for 2 years. So basically, we're moving them up the levels quicker based on an ancillary teaching certificate.
Do they get the tax credit for multiple years?
You can get it every year.
Yes.
Okay,
So
so
it is a raise for them,
it's
yeah.
essentially a raise because we understand that our child care teachers have very low salaries, but this is a way that on the back end, on the tax side, that they're getting credit.
Exactly.
It's
I
like
got
a
it.
bonus.
That makes tons of sense, and it sounds great. And I'm excited that the people who are taking care of my baby at this very moment will benefit. So
If she's part of the rating system, so they need to be a type 3 center. So that's great.
do you
It
think
incentivizes
I would
that.
dare send my child to
No,
any center
because
other
we
than a
would call
type
you
3,
on it
Miss
if you
Bronfman?
did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this is an individual tax credit
Yes.
of their state income tax return.
That's correct.
Yes, and this is so cool, y'all. These tax credits, I think you've heard me say before, our school readiness tax credits are a national model.
Yes.
Nebraska last year actually passed what they call their version of the Louisiana school readiness tax credits. We have received so much acclaim for these credits. They're very
So,
unique.
Ms. Bronfman, you ask a lot of us, and I'm going to sit here and ask something of you, and that is to help us get the word out. Because
Definitely.
we have to sit here and talk about what this means and what it looks like, and so we need our advocates to help us get the word out because we certainly want people to take advantage of this.
Definitely.
So, thank
Definitely.
you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say that when I went to the Early Learners Fellows program and we talked about tax credit, that's where other states began to call in and say, how can we do this in our state and be able to do the same thing to have quality child care? So we are a model for that. I want to say thank you for you and the persons who put it in the first place.
Thank you.
Sure.
Very exciting. Ms. Voce.
Can I ask a question, because I really don't fully understand? When you said $5 million, is there a limit then on the tax credits once that amount of money is reached, or is this an unlimited tax credit?
It's unlimited because that money is recurring.
All right.
Yeah.
It's an estimate. We basically...
An estimate is
estimate, right.
if everyone would avail themselves of that
Exactly.
who are eligible.
Exactly.
But maybe you should go ahead and file your taxes early. I mean,
I'm sure they will.
yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank
Anything else, board members? There's a lot to this motion. We have a number of motions with multiple bulletins in them. There is a technical edit that we want to add. So, Ms. Landry, can you do that for us?
The emergency rule for sections of Bulletin 139 regarding staff school readiness tax credit is in response to Senate Resolution 209 and House Resolution 217.
Thank you very much. Are the makers of the motion comfortable with that edit? Yes, great. Okay. Do we have any other public comment? Nope. Yes, Ms. Fauché.
I would just like, though, for the record, our state superintendent outlined the need for an emergency rule, emergency action on that particular one, just so that we'll have it understood by everyone, including me.
Sounds good. Anybody else? All right. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 137, item 5.3, consideration of bulletins regarding school choice and school personnel in response to legislation of the 2017 regular legislative session. The department recommendation is to approve, as notice of intent, revisions to bulletins 126, 130, and 134, amending this to delete Section 905 of Bulletin 130 on page 146, and also amending to delete on page 145 Section 301.A.1, the last sentence that is underscored. If you need me to repeat that, I will.
Please do so.
All right. We are deleting Section 905 of Bulletin 130 on page 146 in your packet.
Okay, and pause. So 146, section 905, delete.
Gone.
Got it.
On page 145,
Yes.
section 301A1, the last sentence that is underscored will be deleted from the revisions.
Is that teacher or administrator?
Yes. Superintendent White. Oh, we need a motion. Sorry.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Orange Jones, and a second by Mr. Davis. Is that fair, Ms. Orange Jones? Sure. Okay. Yes.
Members, I won't belabor the whole list of changes that are being proposed here. I'll just comment on the one that we just discussed, and also will say that all of them are changes that came out of the legislative session. It's a large set of issues related to the process for approving charter schools, corporal punishment for students with disabilities, and changes to tuition donation rebate programs. All of these come verbatim from the statutes, and because the laws came into effect either in July or in August, depending on the bills, they are being placed into the bulletins now. The one, however, that we just discussed does bear some explanation. This is a placing into the bulletin of a law that was put into place a year ago. It was authored by Senator Boudreaux, and it was the now well-recognized compromise that was reached regarding the percentage of an educator's evaluation that is to be accounted for through the value-added system. This was a compromise at the time publicly announced and hailed by the business community, by educator unions, and others in the process, and now we are simply codifying it in the bulletins because this is the school year in which it comes into effect. The reason we just took some language out is that we had also proposed to try to clarify definitions related to who is a certificated education administrator. After having conversations with personnel directors and others around the state who are represented here today, we've concluded that that issue probably requires greater discussion because in trying to clarify, we realize that we may disrupt local processes to determine who is evaluated in one way and who is not. And so we're asking for a little bit more time in making that clarification. I'm happy to answer any questions or have our staff answer questions about all of these, but again, they are placing into bulletins what the legislature has already placed into the statutes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
In terms of public comment, Eva Kemp with the Democrats for Education Reform of Louisiana supports the recommendation but does not wish to speak. And then Debbie Moe with LAE is here for informational purposes and does wish to speak.
Thank you. Debbie Moe, representing the Louisiana Association of Educators. And I am going to be speaking on Part B, the first bullet, which is the value-added model, and that going back into effect. Superintendent White is correct. It is law, and I'm not going to argue with that. It was a compromise, and a compromise is the best possible agreement amongst dissenting groups. We still do not believe that value-added is reliable or valid. However, we understand that we made the compromise. But that's not really the reason that I wanted to speak. Because the value-added or transitional data is going into effect, I think that we need to have some kind of emphasis on reporting. Let me give you an example. I worked with several teachers over the spring and summer in a parish that was taking the transitional data and then developing assistance plans for them, or support plans is what they called them. The plans themselves were based on guesses, and sometimes not even educated guesses. The transitional data is a number, and you're either a positive number or you're a negative number. Those who had negative numbers were, the district was trying to help them However, they had no idea what to do. So one of the teachers came and said, on my compass, I got a 4. I was a 4 in every area, including classroom management. But the principal was told that she had to be on a plan. So what the principal decided was that she would, over the summer, read a book on classroom management. That does not make any sense. It's a waste of time and effort. I do know that the Leap 360 is going to give teachers a better view of what kids are actually succeeding at and those areas that they need to have help in. However, it is not the test. The test at the end of the year, I believe, needs better reporting, not only to the parents, but to the teachers. I need to know as a teacher, when I taught those kids, where was I successful? Where was I not successful? I also need to know those kids coming in, what were they successful at? What were they not successful at? We have too much guessing going on when it comes to helping teachers with the instructional work that they need to do for the kids that they are teaching. I would like to ask that BESE look at promulgating some rules to make sure that the best possible reporting is given to our teachers so that they can do their job adequately. Well, actually more than adequately, to the best possible degree that they can perform it.
Thank you, Ms. Moe. I know that we have department staff that's working really hard to make sure that we report information in such a way that it's meaningful for parents, it's meaningful for educators, that hopefully we can make it even meaningful for students. So I appreciate that feedback. It's something that we can certainly take to the department and make those connections for you. And then I also have to say, I agree 100% in terms of ineffective professional development, and it needs to be connected to what the teacher needs. And one of the things I'm most excited about with this new federal law is the new definition of professional development. So the research is really clear about what professional development is. The federal law is clear about what good professional development is, and we hear it time and time again from the field. So it's not something that we have to figure out. It's just something we have to figure out how to implement. So I'm sure we would appreciate your support in making sure we make that happen.
If I may just say one thing. I am not blaming any of the administrators that were trying to help teachers. They need to do that. That is their job. But they need more information in order to do that. So I'm hoping that we can provide that to them so that our teachers are improving in areas where they need to improve and not just doing an exercise of futility.
I would recommend you spend a little time with Ms. Baggion because she's thinking really hard about that work right now. So,
thank you.
Yes. Yes, Ms. Boche.
And I'm too a little concerned about the timing and the depth of information. And I've talked with the superintendent about it, and maybe he can explain a little bit. Ms. Moe referred to the transitional growth scores, which we would receive, or we have received in the past couple of years around Christmas or after Christmas, which is halfway through the school year. So when we're looking at how teachers have done with their, quote, the VAM scores or the transitional growth scores, it's a very short period of time in which to try to look at how they had done the prior year when the current year was halfway over. When this compromise was reached, and I'm not even get into personal, what I think of the I guess the rubric. We have it in law, 35% BAM, 15% SLTs for those teachers who will get BAM scores. The timing of the results is extremely important in the progress that we make with teaching and learning in the state. When we, in school districts, evaluate teachers at the end of the school year, we will, if the VAM scores are not available, we will not be able to complete those evaluations prior to teachers leaving for the summer. So then you have options. If we get the information in the summertime, then you'd have to call the teachers back in sometime over the summer to sit and discuss it. Or if you say, well, it's just a number, it's 35%, stick it in let the teacher know what it is, and move on and complete the evaluation. If we don't get the scores until into the fall, then you're not able to complete the prior year's evaluation until you get them. What's most important, as well as completing that evaluation, is how then do we support that teacher in determining what PD they need, taking a look at not only just that teacher, but your whole district pathway, because you do a lot of that PD over the summer or in preparation for the opening of the school year. So you're looking at that data to inform the professional development not only of teachers, but of classes of teachers within your system. So in discussion with Superintendent White, he told me that he's looking into trying to expedite that. Could you talk a little bit to us about, does that seem feasible to do? Is it going to be, are we going to be able to get those results sooner, do you think?
I do. I think we'll have them in the summer. Henceforth, they will be released in the summer. We spoke last week about it, and I don't have a specific date yet, but it will be in the summer, immediately following the assessment. The assessment will be in May. We'll release the results in June, and then in the summer, we'll have the value-added data back.
So we will then complete those evaluations for those teachers, I guess, toward the end of the summer for the prior year, is what you're saying?
I believe so. I don't have a specific date yet, but we're working on it, and we'll get it to you when we do. But we're trying to get it as quickly as we can. I mean, there's a tension between many district leaders and school leaders want and advocated that the test be pushed back as far in the year as possible. Now the flip side of that coin is coming, which is that it's hard to get all the results back as quickly as people might like because of that. But the schedule will be on henceforth is tests in April and May, results in June, just literally the student-by-student results, and then value-added analysis.
July we can get at least that.
Well,
so
you're trying to pin me down,
I'm
Ms.
trying to pin
Roche?
you down, absolutely.
We're working on it. It'll be in the summer. Yeah,
Okay,
we're working on it.
but it's really very important. And then the other thing on the item analysis piece, to help inform this instruction in the next year, but also to inform our professional development with teachers over the course of the summer. And most of us have in-service not only all during the summer, but intensive right prior to the beginning of the school year. So our cycle is a little bit different possibly than the state cycle, but it's very important to us to get that type of detail delineation as early as possible.
Yeah, and so two things on this. I understand your point and agree with it. First, unfortunately, because summative assessment has only been administered once a year, it creates this kind of everybody's waiting for the data phenomenon. So what we've chosen to do is to end that phenomenon and to just allow you to administer assessments over the course of the year, which are at an item level. So you see each item, you see the standards to which it's attached, and you see a subclaim analysis on that. I don't believe, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, that we have ever done on the summative LEAP an item level analysis. I did send you an end of course report that you may that I think maybe what you're if you could, yeah. But so I think what districts and schools will have now is much more granular item level analysis over the course of the year, so you can see the students' progress on an item by item, standard by standard, subclaim by subclaim basis without ever having to wait for the state to just bring it back at the end of the year. In other words, you'll know in November, January, March where the student's performance is without having to wait until June
So
for
we'll
the
get
state.
that on the diagnostic and the interims?
Yes,
All right.
yes, yeah.
Superintendent, you don't have to answer this question, but are you going to be using LEAP 360?
Excuse me?
Are you going to be using LEAP 360? Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Nope. Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 151, item 5.4, consideration of revisions to bulletins regarding students with disabilities and edits in response to legislation of the 2017 regular legislative session. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to bulletins 741, 1508, and 1706.
We need a motion. Thank you, Mr. Rock. A second by Dr. Thomason. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you. Members, again, this is bringing the bulletins into line with the statutes, but I do want to emphasize two particular laws that were changed. First, in bipartisan legislation, the legislature has banned the use of corporal punishment for students with disabilities. That covers any child who has a disability classified under IDEA. It also added additional students with other classifications as well, which is something that we discussed with you at length during the session. Ultimately, you supported, and I'm glad that it passed. Less noted publicly, but just as important, is that there was a revision that was supported by advocates for students that revises the terminology that refers to deaf and hard of hearing students. It replaces all references in the law using the term hearing impairment and changes it to hearing loss or hard of hearing, depending on the appropriate context in the given bulletin. That is a change that is important. As you know, we're doing quite a lot of work with this upcoming year on the School for the Deaf, and we'll be convening ultimately groups to talk more specifically about students statewide. And so I appreciate very much you making this important change in the bulletin. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members, Eva Kemp is with Democrats for Education Reform. She supports the recommendation but does not wish to speak. Jimmy Chalice Gore supports the recommendation and will be testifying. April Dunn, Vice President of the Louisiana DD Council, is here for information and will testify. And Lee Barrios is also here for informational purposes. She wishes to speak. She's with the Friends of Public Education. And Mr. Gore is with the Deaf Grassroots Movement, and he's the state representative. So if you all would come forward, we can move on to our public testimony. Go ahead, April.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is April Dunn. I'm the Vice Chair of the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council, and this is not related it's related to 4.1, which is C. The council has sent a letter complaining about seat membership is not enough parents and self-advocates on the board. So I was wondering if you guys can have more parents and self-advocates on the board for seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. Mr. Gore?
Good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Gore. I'm here to speak about SEEP as well. I've been going to meetings. I applied to be on, have a position on that committee, and I wasn't chosen. But when I'm looking at those who are on the committee, we're looking at, they were talking about students who need interpreters. So I raised my hand and said, who actually is the one who are utilizing and needing the interpreters? And they said, the child. And I said, no, it's not just the child, it's the teachers as well. It seems that no one is aware because there's no representation for deaf on that committee. The law says that you need to have people who use the services as well as parents of children who use services, and I wasn't chosen for that committee, but I would be able to represent the deaf community, and I know about deaf education as well as issues with interpreters. People who are on this committee have no idea. So I was wondering why they weren't choosing me to be on that committee. I could be a representative. I mean, I'm a parent with deaf children as well as myself using services, and I still have a child who's in school. So I'm noticing that they're violating federal law saying you need to have these people who are using these services on this committee. So I'm wondering why that is not occurring and asking the board to look into that.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. Board members, I'll say that this particular item, the SEEP committee membership, was part of the consent agenda, and so staff asked people to replace it under this particular item if you're having questions about why we're having this discussion. All right. Ms. Barrios.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. So I was hoping that Sean Fleming or someone else from developmental disabilities would be here, but since they're not, I'll go ahead and refer to some of the issues that I've already spoken to. But you were copied in a letter from the Disabilities Council to OSEP regarding several of the concerns and the illegalities regarding the setup of the SEEP, the number of special needs people and representatives on the council. Also, their letter also included that SEEP passed a motion to have LDOE bring back recommendations for SEEP to consider changing its bylaws related to SEEP membership. To change SEEP bylaws will not be considered until the next SEEP meeting scheduled for September 27th. This plan would leave SEEP and LDOE out of compliance with federal law until at the earliest the following SEEP meeting scheduled for November 15th. Another concern is a vote to change SEEP bylaws would not be conducted with adequate representation of individuals with disabilities and parents of children because of the membership problems. Finally, SEEP bylaw solution to this violation of federal law suggests federal law has been superseded by a SEEP bylaw. Hence, the solution taken by LDOE seems to violate the supremacy clause of the United States. You should have received, if you haven't received a copy of that letter, I hope that you'll look at it and take it seriously. My personal concern is I have been on a quest for years to get recordings of and documents associated with all of these advisory council meetings, and yet that has not been completely accomplished yet. With regard to SEEP, when I went to listen to the recordings, I noted that the last one posted on the department website was for November 3rd, 2016. So I filed a public information request. I know, Ms. Garvey, that drives you nuts, but sometimes it's the only way to get information. And was told that they're looking into how they post those. Evidently, they're now provided on YouTube. Even though on the department website there are Accountability Commission recordings posted and this one SEEP advisory panel meeting recording. So Shan is working with the department, I believe, to see how they can make that more obvious so that people, when they go to the department website, can access those. I'd like to also ask that when the agendas are posted, that the documents that are going to be presented, the PowerPoints, et cetera, are also attached, just like they are for the BESE meetings. And certainly when the minutes are written or the recordings are posted, at least then that those documents are posted because they're very important. I believe that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios.
May I just make a note? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I right that the meetings are posted and the recordings are posted online with next to it? Is that right?
Yes, John, and that's what I want to clarify with Ms. Lee. We sent a message to her, including Shan, on this email, her requesting the recordings, and yes, they are online. However, it is very difficult to find, and the department is working on a solution of how can it be worked out that it's easier to locate those recordings, but they are there.
And if I could,
yeah.
If I could suggest, when you do go to the YouTube page, then they're a mixture of accountability, such and such a date, SEEP, such and such a date. If they could be all SEEP, all account, that sort of thing, it just makes it so much easier.
Sure. The SPED department.
Are you
is working on
volunteering
that.
your services?
Sure.
She'd be glad to. We'd love to have you assist. But in saying this, in regards to membership, I just want to also clarify, as chair of the SEEP panel, that we are in compliance. We are adding additional parents. And as you know, Ms. Barrios, that there is a selection committee that interviews through application process for membership. And certain individuals were serving as having dual roles on the panel, so that caused some concerns. And so therefore, there's an increase from 19 to 23 members, and by November, this particular concern will be handled and in compliance. So there is effort made. John, I don't know if you want to add any more? I mean, with the committee, yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Ms. Holloway, I'd like to thank you for serving on behalf of the board in that position. I served in that position before you did, and I know of the commitment that it takes. So thank you so much for representing our board in that
Absolutely.
position. And I know, Ms. Edmonston, that you were there and supporting the work as well, and have a really strong background in this area. So thank you both.
Absolutely.
It's certainly, everything we do is critical, but this is one of the many important things we do. So, okay. Board members, do
may
you
I
have
add
any-
something, please? May I add something? In regards to the seat, is that possible? Okay. When I'm looking at the membership, most of them are focusing on disabilities, but we're looking at auditory language acquisition. That's the big push, but I don't see any other kind of language acquisition, for example, visual language acquisition. So we need someone who's able to represent that group of people, because the way visual language acquisition is very different than auditory language acquisition.
Ms.
Thank you,
Holloway,
Jay.
I'm going to ask you to follow up outside of the committee.
No, I'm
meeting.
Jimmy, not Jay.
Jimmy, I'm sorry.
Okay. Board members, I want to bring us back to the motion on hand and see if you have any questions or comments about this motion. Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 163, item 5.5, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 1566, pupil progression and policies and procedures. The department recommendation is to defer until December revisions to Bulletin 1566 relative to transitional ninth grade.
Is there a motion to defer? Thank you, Ms. Edmonston, seconded by Mr. Garvey. I did have a comment card. It was Ms. Kemp from Democrats for Education Reform. She supports the recommendation but did not wish to speak. That was prior to it being deferred, for the record. So, okay. Superintendent, do you wish to speak? No. Board members, do you have any questions or concerns? Do you have any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 166, item 5.6, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 118, statewide assessment standards and practices. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revision to Bulletin 118 regarding scale score ranges for statewide assessment. Updated documentation has been distributed for this item.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And a second, Ms. Orange Jones. We have the superintendent.
Thank you. Members, I'm just going to kind of set the table for this. About 7 years ago, state social studies standards were revised. Those standards were never placed into the LEAP assessment, however, which continued to reflect outdated standards. And so a year and a half ago, the state, for the first time, field tested, meaning kind of gave a tryout to new test questions under the state's new social studies standards. This year was the first year in which a fully operational social studies standards, according to the new standards, was administered around the state. That involves more response to reading, more writing on the test than had been the case before. It was also administered through a different mode than before, rather than just the bubble test paper-based assessment. As a result, anytime a test is taken in the first year, the makers of the test go back and essentially double-check their work to make sure that the assumptions that they had about how hard the questions were when they gave it a trial run proved to be accurate. And after they do that double checking, then they establish cut scores which do not change so long as the test continues to be administered. Those cut scores are the scores on the scale where basic, mastery, and advanced are delineated. That process is operated with a combination of psychometricians, which is the technical experts who determine the values of different items, the difficulty of different items on the test, as well as Louisiana teachers, in a committee that is a technical committee that establishes the value of each question and thus the cut scores on the test. It's been the tradition in Louisiana that so as to assure oversight of the establishment of those cut scores, that the board place those cut scores into its bulletins, and that's been the practice since the advent of the LEAP. This is therefore a vote to approve the cut scores on a given test. I should tell you that this is a fairly routine activity. It's typically, there is some annual process where you're setting cut scores, but that this board has not set cut scores before. The English and math tests, which were revised several years ago, those cut scores were set several years ago, but this board has not been through that process yet. We do have staff and others on hand to answer questions if they come up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
What will be if this motion passes, what's the process from here so that ultimately students receive this score, or what's the timeline?
That would be an almost immediate turnaround. In other words, the points for each student's scores have been identified. So students took the test, we double-checked the work. In light of that, we scored it. The question is not how many points does each child have. That's been assessed. The question is where along that continuum of points do you establish the cut scores. As soon as you determine that, then we will immediately turn around and apply those so that students will receive their marks.
And communicate those to the districts, who will then communicate them out to
Correct.
parents.
They'll be communicated first to districts and then to parents on an individual child basis. Right. Then we'll post the aggregated results so that schools and districts can see the aggregated results. And then ultimately in October and November, you'll have the school level report cards, letter grades, and so on.
Dr. Jones?
Let me see if I understand this. So once those cut scores are established, they'll remain consistent for as long as that particular version of the test is used.
That's been the practice, that the cut score remains the same.
Okay. So, you know, this statement in the bulletin is very brief and doesn't really give very much information. Will we at some point publish those cut scores in the bulletin so that...
They're published every year in an annual testing guide, effectively. So they are.
Okay, but they're not in this bulletin per se.
And I believe there are additional materials in the. Yeah.
Okay.
There's board members, we had received an additional handout for this item, and I believe, Dr. Jones, this would be situated with the other subjects once it sits in the bulletin.
Okay, so I'm speaking from ignorance here then. So.
Well, that's what we're here for, is to work all this out before you take a vote, Dr. Jones. Want you to feel comfortable with your votes. Ms. Voce.
I guess I had the same question because I looked at, there was a range for the scaled scores, but I had not seen the supplement where you actually break them off into each of the categories.
Yeah. And then it'll be situated within the bulletin with the other subject areas. So it'll make sense in the actual bulletin. Does that make sense? Yes?
Well,
all right.
That'll be a rarity.
Come on, Dr. Jones. It's almost lunchtime. Are there any other questions? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Mr. Davis, what time would you like for your committee to begin? Oh, I'm sorry. This one? We did have a public comment card from Ms. Kemp. She supports the recommendation but does not wish to speak, and she's with Democrats for Education Reform Louisiana.
Do we have lunch ready? Are we going to? Let's do 12:45 then.
Thank you, sir. This meeting is adjourned.